Welcome to the Morning Energy Show, where we bring you insights from leaders shaping the future of renewable energy. Today we're excited to have Scott Hyde, CEO of Sunobi, a transformative platform revolutionizing the residential solar sales process. Scott shares his journey from the highs and lows of leading companies like Coda to his current role at Sunobi, where he's doubling close ratios and setting new standards in sales efficiency and transparency. Here's your host, Jay Kess, ready to dive into this story of innovation, resilience, and operational excellence in the solar industry.
Welcome, everybody, to the Morning Energy Show. I am very excited to have Scott Hyde on with us. We're going to go over something we haven't heard of before. The reason I asked Scott to come on is because he has a very interesting subject for us to listen to. Scott, thanks for coming on and joining us on the Morning Energy Show. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jake. I'm so happy to see all your success and how this show's kind of taken off, and just very honored to be a part of it. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad you watch it. All right, so I wanted to dive in and kind of set up the background a little bit about you, if that's okay, before we dive into the new thing that I'm excited for everybody to hear. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. Most people probably know you from a brand called Sunobi. Although you did run an installation company as well in San Diego. It was very large. I remember passing the trucks on the freeway all the time. I'd snap a photo. I just felt bad sending it to you, but you are a very well-known organization, and Sunobi is like the cinematic grade high-end proposal tool that most everyone falls in love with when they see it. So I have a question for you. What was it like on your personal and work life running an install company of your size and a highly utilized software company at the same time?
I would say that it was both a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that we had this kind of interesting sandbox to work in with Coda. And so the things that we would think about, we could implement in a way that maybe we wouldn't have an option to do otherwise, and get some real-time feedback and see if it really did help the installer. So much of the software is so sales facing that if the object and goal is really just to provide something that's great for sales folks, sometimes that doesn't work really great for the installer. And so we hope that what we did had a lasting effect on the whole process, not just the front end. And so that part was nice. Personally, it was and still is, I guess I would say, probably a really strong drain on. I feel like I was burning the candle at both ends all the time, and that can be taxing. But I think if you really believe strongly in the mission that you're trying to go after, then it's worth it to an extent. Like, our industry needs a lot of change, and Sunobi, as you said, I think is mostly known for its aesthetics. I wish that it was known for some other things too. I think that will change over time, but it is because it's just so starkly different than what people see that it's easy. It's on the tip of the tongue about, did you see what it looks like versus what it does. But
well, do people have access to the backside of everything that it does, or did they just get to see the front-facing aesthetic side?
There's definitely some things that were specific to Coda, that no one else had, simply because when we first were building Sunobi, we were using some back-end pieces that were attached to Coda as some of its framework, and the architecture needed to be changed. So that is a very challenging obstacle to overcome. So anyone building software knows that if you start changing architecture midway through, it's like
has a domino effect on everything it touches.
Yeah, it's like if you've built a house and then somewhere in the middle of it, they're like, "Hey, we did 2x4 framing. We need to switch this out to metal studs."
Ooh.
While you're living in the house at the same time, that's effectively what you're doing. So it's a challenging things to do. So I give a lot of credit to our team for being able to pull that off with as few interruptions as people saw. But because of that interaction and that relationship between Coda and Sunobi initially, there were some pieces that Coda construction had access to that other companies didn't. And those things are being built and will come out for the masses. But it did give us some insight that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And that part was very, very, that was the blessing part, right? Of being able to see all those things at the same time. The curse was
the KPIs of all of this, of the projects that were going through the software. Is that what you're referring to?
yeah. I mean, so selling a job, is meaningful, but it's, it's meaningless if it doesn't get to the roof. And
Sure.
finding out all the reasons why it doesn't get to the roof and all the stages in which something would cancel, trying to hone in on that, how you'd improve the front end piece to affect the back end. How does something you do at point of sale really impact the ability to get something installed? Sadly, there's a bit of a disconnect that if you sell something, it should just be installed without, any changes. And there's like 4 or 5 places where the job will change. So it's almost inevitable, right? Like you're selling a construction project to somehow think that it's not going to change. There's a level of ignorance there that we have as an industry that I think is in need of some change. But
That's understood. What are those times? Site survey, what they find on site survey when the CAD is being generated, right?
Yeah. So
install day.
if you think about it, just anytime there's a possible scope of work change, that's when you have a possibility for a change order. And anyone who makes a decision about scope of work change. So whether it's the sales rep, the homeowner, the install company, or the jurisdiction that you're in, right? Which would include like the utility. So if you sold a job and suddenly the utility company comes out and says, we actually need to do a relocate on your MPU because it's too close to a gas line. Well, that's not the installer's fault. It's not the homeowner's fault. Sales rep probably could have been more prepared for it. The installer could have been more prepared for it. But that's something that would change the scope of work because now you have additional work to be done. So all of those things, like the decisions that everyone makes that affects it, all those entities that affect the decision-making process, how everything's interrelated from a tech standpoint to move that job through the process as seamlessly as possible. And making sure that you're prepared on the front end as much as you possibly can be to eliminate as many of those things as possible at the point of sale. That's a very complicated set of circumstances to kind of navigate, and asking a brand new sales rep or a setter for that matter to say, I got all this. It's messy.
That is messy. So you found yourself between running an installation company and building the software, and then all of the complexities between the two. For example, reframing that house or reframing your software, like you mentioned, finding indicators to create efficiencies within your installation organization. And how did all of that have an effect on your personal life?
Like I said, I mean, I think I feel like I have been for a long time, been burning the candle at both ends. Like, I mean, I have a really strong work ethic to begin with, and my family, and at one point even my therapist was telling me that I have
Good
like
for
an
you.
irrational sense of optimism, right? And then also like an irrational sense of risk tolerance.
An irrational sense of optimism is a thing.
Yes. Apparently, that's what he told me.
Everything's gonna be okay.
It's like, look, dude, you gotta wind that down a little bit. Not everything's gonna work out every time. So I think that's propelled me through some of these challenges. I think this last couple years have been without question the most challenging part of my business life ever. And I know I'm probably in a large group who would say the same thing about the last couple years in solar. I think it's been difficult for many, many people. So
Yes, you are. I recently learned a statistic. I believe it's the national average of companies that went out of business is about 50% right now nationally. Is that right? Before we dive in, what's that?
50% in across the nation in solar, 80% in California.
Yeah, where you and I both live.
Yeah. where all those trucks no longer drive down the road.
One of my favorite things to do was build a business that relied heavily on all of the businesses in the solar industry. That's been fun.
I bet you've had zero churn.
But you also have Sunobi, which does the same thing. It on a larger scale, it deals with a lot of businesses across the country. So everyone is feeling the ramifications of that. I have another question for you though, because the delicacy of handling an install company and creating a universal software for the industry to use. How did you gain the trust of other companies when they found out that you had an install company and wanted them to use your software without fearing that you would take their accounts?
I mean, that's obviously the larger issue that you're asking is kind of the heart of some of the problems in solar is trust, like across the board. A sales rep showing up at someone's house, the first thing they're actually selling to a customer is trust. The
That's
signature they put on their contract between them and the install agreement or the install company is about trust. Are you going to pay me? The installer and the lender, you gonna pay me like we promised? Or are you going to change the terms? That's about trust. Is the product I ordered going to be here, or is it somehow going to get stuck at port? A lot of that stuff is about trust, right? So, number one, I felt like we did a good job, at least in our contract, that we put verbiage in there explicitly stating that data that was assigned to them or created from them belonged to them, belonged to our customers. That the only purpose we'd use data for was be to improve the tech. It wouldn't be for resale or for use for personal gain or things like that. So, and we had that conversation probably, I'd say, maybe half a dozen times with companies who would bring that question up and ask.
Oh, is that it? Wasn't too big of a deal?
Nah, I mean, I think that I think enough people in that particular space had done enough damage and created enough of their own reputation that I think people were just more accustomed to that particular thing happening rather than, I mean, if it's legally written and they have recourse and you talk about it up front, it's not that big of an issue because you're addressing the elephant in the room to an extent. But we never had those issues to begin with. But I don't think that there was of a lot of resistance, to be honest, from that. And I would say that what I found to be most interesting about that relationship between other companies and Sunobi that happened to be, say, Coda's competition. I mean, Coda and
Mhm.
Sunobi were separate companies, but the line drawn between them is not hard.
Sure.
So, but when I look at it, I think, man, we had 450 or so companies accessing Sunobi and something around 8,000 reps using it at one point, and nearly all of them were my competitors. Or I should say,
450 companies.
yeah, nearly all of them were Coda's competitor, I would say. So, in reality, Coda wasn't a very big company geographically. So it wasn't like we were running into a lot of people anyway. But if that ever did come up, it was really easy just to point to the contract and say, you have a right here that we've already written down. It's not an issue. And
Interesting. I didn't know it was that simple of a conversation, I guess, or an understanding just because it was in an agreement. I would anticipate that some businesses would be very afraid with that trust issue like you're talking about. So that's good to know.
I mean, maybe people said no because that was something. I don't know. I mean, the conversations I had, that at least if someone was open enough to have a conversation, that particular objection didn't come up enough that it was an issue that needed to be tackled beyond just that conversation of saying, look, man, it's in your agreement. We're not, like, we hold the data part pretty serious. And I think the way we set the business model up, that, we weren't getting paid anything unless a deal closed.
That's right. Yeah.
It aligns with their success. Like, our whole mission was to say, I want you to win and I want to win with you. And I'm not going to ask you to pay me anything until we win. I think that set the tone from a business model standpoint, that we're not here to scam you in any way. We really just want to make the industry better.
Well, I really appreciate you spending some time with me on that question, even though it wasn't that big of an objection for you that you handled, because it does segue into another question I have for you a little bit later when we dive into that topic that I'm interested in everyone hearing. But I have some more questions to kind of put this in context. What you're about to propose to everybody, or what you're about to say. Do you mind if I ask you a hard question?
There's no better ones.
Okay. You opened up about something that I know to be painful to you, and that is the status of Coda. I believe when we originally talked, you mentioned something like seeing nostalgic memories inside of the rooms inside of the Coda building. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I had sent you a document that I've been working on because I really wanted some of your insight and your expertise and opinion on just the idea as a whole. But in there, I think it's important that the creation and the genesis of that idea, a lot of times, for me anyway, is born out of really difficult situations. They say that necessity is the mother of invention, and a lot of times, as you're in
Mm,
those
I like
moments
that.
where it's really hard, and you're trying to figure out like, do I stay in solar? Is all the things I thought I was doing right, are they the right things when the company had to shut down? The direct question that you asked is, what's the status of Coda, and share some of those feelings. That Coda is shut down. It's in the middle of going through a bankruptcy, and it's a really, really painful experience when if people think that business is not personal. Um, I guess I wish I had that level of dissociation, but it's very personal. Everything about it is personal. Like Coda was the embodiment of all the things that I wanted to be great, and still ended up having enough warts, and being in a environment that it was a casualty of a much bigger industry wide churn. We didn't. I mean, we had our mistakes as well, but it was really, really hard. The last probably 30 days or so, I would sit in the code office essentially just by myself because there was no one left in the office, and I was effectively squatting in our office because we couldn't pay rent, but we still had keys, and I would pay the last $100 or so to keep the internet going just so that I could work in the office. And it was such a strange, sort of surreal experience to be sitting in the office that used to be buzzing with so much activity, and reps coming in and talking about their latest win, or a customer that they had a question about, or seeing the ops guys in the corner, or in the kind of the main area there in the warehouse, buzzing about and talking about bringing plan sets and discussing any number of things to get a job finished. And back to back Zoom calls, and seeing people writing plans on glass windows and storyboarding these ideas and how to get better, and all the kind of trinkets and stuff that makes up a company. In our case, I sat there with like boxes of, hats that hadn't yet been distributed or were no longer available, that were incentive prizes or things like that, or,
Yeah.
kind of this, this warehouse of pieces of a memory, that you're living in as it's falling apart. And and you're looking around, and it's just silence, and eerily so, where it used to be so loud and so, you know, popping. Now
I don't know how you are
it's
getting
just,
through this conversation. That's so it's making me emotional. It's
but
difficult.
I think that I'm not the only person who's gone through it. I mean, the whole industry has suffered like that to an extent. And to be to have some level of naivety that, that I'm the only one going through it, would be really pretty myopic of myself and very self-centered. And I recognize, I look around, like the whole industry is going through that. I mean, 50% of the country sat in a warehouse at some point just like that. And 80% of the people in California sat there scratching their heads going, what happened?
Mhm.
How did I get to this point? Why? I thought I was doing things right. I thought I was building something better. Every entrepreneur that sets out to start a business has some level of arrogance to themselves. They believe they can do it better than the next guy. Otherwise, they'd fall in line and go, yeah, I'll do it with you. But,
Exactly.
but at some point they go, no, I think I can do it better.
Yeah. It's the
And
only reason you start a business.
yeah, so when you sit there at the end of that and you look around and see what amounts to the remnants or casualties of your business, there's a like a self-awareness and a reckoning of, is what I did meaningful? Is what I set out to accomplish, did it have purpose? Did it achieve the results I wanted to achieve? And it fell short, certainly. So, do you just kind of lick your wounds and start over? Do you quit altogether and just do a new thing because you're just burnt out? Or do you go, how do I do this differently and better? What is it that went wrong holistically? Because if I do the same thing again, I'll be the same person, the same company that will inevitably have the same result. And I don't want to do that.
No, you don't want to do that. And I really appreciate you opening up and sharing that and painting that image for us. Uh, that vision of disparity, can I say, is what you talked about a little bit earlier, and from that you can sprout something that might be meaningful. What was the phrasing that you used? I've already forgotten it, but I really liked it.
I don't know.
Something that born of necessity, I believe it
Oh,
was.
yeah, necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah, and so because you shared all of that, because you went through what you did and you have all of this data from Sunobi that maybe not everybody got to see, but you're creating something where they will get to see it. You have all
Yep.
this data, you went through that pain, you're able to create something, and that's what you sent me over, and that's what I'm glad that we went through all of that stuff, and I'm glad you shared it because I want everyone to understand, um, I guess, your motivation to create what you did. And so here it comes. You told me about a model inspired by Visa that addresses the strains in our industry. I guess Visa inspired you to think this way. Can you explain this idea and how you believe it will make a difference?
Um, yeah, I mean, in the kind of the darker hours there where you're trying to find some solace and like what's the path forward, I started doing just a whole bunch of research about, really it was open ended. I didn't have an agenda of like I'm going to go research Visa. That just came through the research.
Okay.
It was like, what, there has to be other industries that have gone through this. This cannot be the first time that something like this has happened. If we're to look around and say, what's wrong with solar or what happened to solar? Because from 2013, 14, when I was first starting through 2021, effectively 2020, solar was like on a constant hockey stick growth pattern. Well, that's not new. Like that's happened before, but inevitably there's like usually a crash of some sort or a leveling or a settling and then maybe another growth period in an industry. But solar felt more like it just like collapsed. And I know I was in the epicenter of
Instantly.
California, right, where it was like 80%. So I started doing a bunch of research, like this has to have happened before. And
You just didn't accept it as being just the way it was. Like there's a pattern
yeah,
somewhere.
there has to be. There has to be. Because if you start looking around, and I would have these conversations with people that I respect in the industry, and I'd say, if you could point to one thing you think is wrong, like the root cause of what's wrong with solar, what would it be? And you and I kind of bantered about this briefly, but the answer's kind of really just circled around a handful of things that I bet you everyone who listens to this would be able to spout off as well. It'd be like, well, you tell me, what are the things you've heard? What are when you because you've talked to a ton of people, you have a huge audience. What do people say happened to solar?
I I I have talked with you about this briefly. We went to Interstellar, and which I call Interstellar. We went to Intersolar,
It's a better
and we
name.
were
We should
going to
just keep
speak on
it
the Franklin
Interstellar.
panel. What's that?
We should just keep it Interstellar. That's a better name.
I don't know what they were thinking. That's a marketing opportunity missed. But I advocated that it might be on the sales side, or I positioned that it was on the sales side of this misunderstanding and misalignment, that on their expectations and their processes that might have had a domino effect on the industry. And at that time, you opened my eyes to a different perspective, that it might be the financiers and some of the terms that they changed. And I thought it was just fascinating, like to your point, when you ask different people in the industry, they have a different perspective. And it's interesting to see how all of them do overlap, and it might not just be one thing; it might be a culmination of many. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have, I've since probably evolved some of my thought on that. I think everyone has some culpability. Like if we look around and say to those two things, is there fault in sales? Sure. Everyone can point to a guy they know that's kind of a shady dude, or they've heard of someone who's a shady dude. We have entire you could Google a bunch of stuff online today about solar sales guys and find a dozen negative articles that have been posted in the last 6 to 12 months about how bad that is. But we also know the vast majority of people that we interact with are really good people, really good sales guys that really, really want to do the right thing and try really hard to do the right thing. So I don't buy that it's just a sales thing. Or if it is, why is that the case? Why are they doing that? Because it's not just because they just woke up one day and decided they're going to go screw the industry.
I didn't mean necessarily bad practices or bad salespeople. I think what I was talking to is more the educational aspect of it. Like they should be able to tell a homeowner, your panel's going to need a relocation because it's in California within 3 feet of the gas line, and we should anticipate that expense. Those types of things.
I agree with that, and so forgive me if I'm not trying to discount that as.
Oh, I don't think you are.
I think that the greater finger pointing is like sales are bad, or as I kind of indicated in the past, the financiers really screwed us up. That the way they handled that was poor. There's other folks who will say the installers just aren't sophisticated enough. They don't know their finances. They're not, they don't really know how to run a business. And you're like,
yeah, I've heard that one.
You're like, okay, cool. Well,
thanks.
I've talked, yeah. I mean, I literally, or they'll say that the tech guys, they got to keep better guardrails in place. And I'm literally sitting in all three of those sectors going, I'm a sales guy, I'm an installer, and I'm a tech guy. Am I personally responsible for the down? You know what I mean? It's like one of those things. Everything I've done just been terrible. And so I'm using this as a lens, like how bad is it really? And what is the bigger issue? So as I start doing some research, I'm finding all these different companies that had similar issues. And the way they solved it was different than what we're trying to do. Visa was one of them. So the story about Visa is there's this guy named D. Hock, Deehock, grew up in this little small town outside of Ogden, Utah, born basically when the Depression starts, hates school, bored out of his mind at church, loves to learn, but, great athlete, and then hurts himself playing football his sophomore year. And becomes I got to say that differently, becomes a fantastic debater. And wins like a state championship on the debate team kind of thing. Loves to read, very intellectual guy. And, ends up getting in kind of finance space. And the problems that the credit card or the transaction type businesses faced at the time in the late 60s and 70s or a handful of things. So I'm going to say some of the things. You tell me this doesn't sound exactly like the solar industry.
Okay.
Number one, none of the banks trusted each other. So if you had a card, in this case, it'd be from like Bank of America's card was at the time called AmeriCard. Which later became Visa, but AmeriCard, and they had another one called Master Charge, which then later became MasterCard. That was a different entity, but AmeriCharge.
I see how they connected those dots.
Yeah, tough one. AmeriCharge was issued by a particular regional bank, right? So if we went to San Diego County Credit Union and got a card from San Diego Credit Union,
Mm-hmm.
that was a tough one to say. And you went to go use that in, say, I don't know, Texas, and you use that card. The way it worked was they would take an imprint of the card on a carbon copy like that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they take one of those things and imprint it, and then they would keep a file of that, and they'd have to call the bank in San Diego and be like, "Hey, I got this dude here. He's presented this card for credit. Is he worthy? Is he a credit-worthy customer?" And the bank would have to then go figure it out and call back and say, "Yeah, he is at the moment," right? Because they couldn't give you balances where they just say, "Yeah, he's credit-worthy."
Sure.
They would then keep that slip of paper, that carbon copy, and they would mail it in to the other bank, and the bank would then send funds back.
The
So
Pony Express style
yeah,
almost.
super effective, right? So what
Wow.
happened is you had zero trust between banks because none of them were using the same system. None of the banks worked together on the same thing. Everyone was afraid that if they used one of these credit card companies, they weren't going to get paid either way.
Sure.
So the bank would be like, "I'm not like, why would a bank in Texas honor this stuff because I don't think San Diego is going to pay me."
I mean, with a model like that, I would understand their suspicion. Not
Do we?
everyone is as optimistic as you are.
or D Hawk, actually, right? So same kind of problem. So he says these kind of things. When you're building a business, there's 4 kind of ways you have to look at it. The first one is where we were. What have we been? The next one is where are we today? The third one is where will we be? And the last and most important, which is the optimistic side, is what ought we to be?
Mm.
And he started building this thing under the premise of what ought we to be rather than where will we be, because he actually didn't think that people were going to do this. He built so Visa became basically a platform that all banks across the country would end up adopting because the cancellations were far too high that eroded all of their profits. And they would, at one point, he went into one of these banks to go look, and they went into the back of the bank, and they open up this room where they have these boxes and boxes and boxes of carbon copy receipts that people had literally forgotten to send in for cash.
Oh, wow.
And then when they would turn them in, some of them had been declined or canceled because too much time had elapsed. And so you had lost profits, both from a not turning in on time standpoint processing problem,
Mm-hmm.
and then you had lost profits from a cancellation problem. That sounds a lot like solar to me.
You're right. That sounds very familiar. Very familiar.
So I'm starting looking at it, I'm like, this is wild. And there's other ones too. There's a whole bunch of other companies type things that have created essentially a platform that changes the industry as a whole. And once you start to see the platform changes, it makes the way you used to do business look pretty foolish. Not because people are foolish, but just because it hadn't evolved yet.
It hadn't existed. It's difficult to create. It's easier to edit. Someone has to create it initially.
That's right. And when you start looking at, like, if you take the premise that solar inherently, from a process standpoint, a platform standpoint, is broken, iterations on that existing broken piece are not going to change the fact that it's broken. It's just going to change different types of ways that it shows its brokenness. The whole thing has to be redone, in my opinion.
Yeah, and let me put that in, help the listeners put that in context a little bit. I'd like you to elaborate. And it goes along with the next question. You asked, why keep doing, this is a previous conversation that Scott and I had, because I was so fascinated by what he was saying that I wanted everyone to come on the show and hear it. You asked, why keep doing business the same way? Just tweaking processes and CRMs. Can you expand on why you think it's time to change the whole system, and maybe illustrate what it was and why it needs to be changed?
Yeah, it's I don't I want to make sure that I say these things with the proper context. I feel like that the blessing part of the roles that I've had in solar have simply given me more data to look at. It's not that am any smarter than the next guy. I think I just had a different advantage. I've been sitting in a very privileged place to see so many companies on Sunobi and see all the data that comes through, and then watch the carnage happen and see trends that have been similar across the board. And then sit and watch Coda do the same thing and like desperately try and fix it, only to see that no matter how much I wanted to fix something or tried to fix something. I mean, I got to tell you, I think I tried more ways to fix Coda and solve things that are, I would love to see someone else come up with a different idea. I think I tried every possible idea you could to fix Coda. And while we made mistakes, and while companies across the board who also went out of business certainly can say they made mistakes in hindsight, I believe that the larger existential crisis is that the solar industry has this almost unspoken death wish, and we don't even know it. And we're marching towards it as if in ignorance, like our blindfolds on, going, everything's going to be great, beating a drum to keep marching in line. And let's change this tune a little bit, not realizing that the line that we're walking on is off a cliff. So when we look at like how solar got here, the root fundamental problem is two things. The number one thing is that there's not working capital in solar. The second one is the existing process, the existing platform doesn't yet exist or hasn't existed. And so what you end up with is disparate systems across multiple companies being employed, hoping to like reinvent the wheel every single time, never learning from each other. You got an installer in New Mexico, another installer literally 10 minutes from that other installer in New Mexico, another dozen in Texas, and every other state, and each of them has their own proprietary system of doing business.
Similar to what you said about San Diego Community Credit Union and the bank, the other
right.
bank in a different state. Okay?
That's right. And they're not doing it because they're stupid. They're doing it because there's no other way to do it. Like there's not a platform for someone to plug into and be like, hey, this is how you do it. What they're doing is like, I think I'm going to try it this way because I started a business because I think I watched this other guy I worked for do it and he did it wrong. So I'm going to do it my way and I'm going to fix this one particular part. And every one of those kind of four pillars of solar, because none of them are connected, the whole thing is going to erode. And those four pillars are like, there's sales and there's install on one side and there's finance and distribution on the other. Distribution would include all the manufacturers. It's just a larger umbrella. Sure. None of them are really connected, right? So you look across the history of solar, we've had a handful of companies be fully vertically integrated. Some have been successful, most of them have not. But it's also because the organization as a whole is across the country and solar is messed up. So you start looking at why is it that a company is really great at installs in one spot, but not great in another, right? So some of the largest, we'll use Titan because it's a casualty and no one's going to be offended if we bring anything up about Titan, right? I mean, Titan was one of the largest solar installers in the nation.
It's one of the more universally recognized brands as well. Yeah. So the analogy should fit well. Yeah.
And I'm not here to like, they did something that most people couldn't do and didn't do. And so I give them credit for being able to do that. But at the end of the day, like they chase something similar that I think everyone feels like they're chasing, which is this myth of what they think scale actually means. So you'll talk to people and they'll say, we can make this profitable if we scale. We just need to scale and we can become profitable. And they use this as this like slogan or, rally cry to go build organizations in other places, thinking that scale just means volume. So in another podcast, another conversation, Paul Steffen of Good Leap has been quoted to say that volume is vanity and profit is sanity, right? The other way of looking at this is that scale in solar has equated to volume, and that's not actually scale. The example of that, or the derivative is that a company says, I'm not making enough money doing 50 deals a month. But if I was doing 70 deals a month or 100 deals a month, I would be more successful. I'd make money. And instead of going, the answer to scale is, can you now do 100 accounts in that same radius that you're doing 50? And instead, what people do is they go, I'm going to go to another city because I have sales guys there that can go sell. And so they'll say, I'm going to go build 50 more an org of 50 more people there, and thinking that they're going to create scale that way. And all they've done is created two different companies, essentially, both mediocre in their processes, both under profitable.
Not on purpose, mediocrity.
No, of course not.
Just because of the nature of the industry, you're meaning, right?
They're chasing what they believe to be the thing that's going to give them profitability, and it doesn't. Scale that way doesn't. Like, density matters more than geography. And people get hung up on the idea of doing more and more and more when density matters most, right? So when the CRM thing that's brought up in the question is just an example of a ton of different ones, right? Like, if I just had a better CRM, I'd be more profitable, or we could get these jobs done faster. We need a new CRM, or I need a new knocking tool, or I need a new proposal tool, or I need a new fill in the blank tech solution, and now I'll be more profitable. And it doesn't mean that those things don't help, because they inevitably do. But you're inserting something into an existing broken system, thinking the insert is going to fix the system when the system itself is flawed. The system won't work. Some of the tech things that do matter and that will make a difference is things like, and this is me as a tech guy, right? Talking about this, saying like tech isn't the only answer. It's a big part of it, but it's not the only answer. So when we were working with Titan, I had the opportunity to kind of go sit down and ask a bunch of their folks there that were the project managers at the time. And I asked them, I said, how much time do you spend as a project manager answering phone calls from reps to do pipeline review calls?
What'd they say?
50 to 80% of their day, every day.
Wow.
So,
I mean, they're a project manager, though. That's what they were brought on for.
I mean, I guess if I would say, so the next question asked is, what was your job description? What are you supposed to do as a project manager? And the answer was, move a job from one stage to the next to get it to roof and be completed.
Why can't a system do that? Why hire people?
And what's wild is that they used a CRM called NetSuite. NetSuite had all of that information in there. And the reps would try and log in, they couldn't find it because it wasn't easily digestible. And so the simple thing they would do is go, I'm going to do what I'm trained to do, which is to get answers out of people. And they would call up the project manager, and pretty soon they start developing pipeline review calls for someone who was more trained in a particular aspect of the CRM to give them the information that was already in the CRM. Yeah. And they'd spend 50 to 80% of their time doing that instead of moving a job from one place to the next. That happens in every single company. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't say every single. I would guess that the vast majority of companies have that same problem.
I haven't seen one that doesn't have that model.
So tech can help there, right? But that also illustrates that there's a problem with the system. The system itself is flawed and broken. If that's what we're doing and that's what's required, we're broken. So part of that happens because a sales rep is, I mean, you know this as well as I do. You talk to a lot of sales guys. What are sales guys worried about the very most?
With really their commission. I mean, right. Yeah.
Everything is a derivative of getting paid.
I mean, it's sad to say. Ultimately, that is it. And you get those outliers that say they care about the homeowner. But a lot of them don't see that homeowner through despite not getting paid. So it's.
Yes. And I'm not saying that to critique them. I mean, no one's here working for a charity.
Sure.
Right? Like no one's signed up to do this for free. Everyone's expecting to get paid. The project manager as much as the sales guy. There's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But when their whole job is to get paid, that's what they're doing. Every decision they make is about that, right? So the first governing rule of human behavior is that everyone is self-interested. That doesn't mean that we can't evolve past that, but the very base level is self-interest. And so when a rep goes, I need to get paid, they're calling the pipeline review call, not really to find out what stage it's in, but it's more to assess how long it's going to take to get paid.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that.
It's not like, hey, is this thing at site survey? How's it going? You guys on that track? It's like, no, I want to know how much further along is it before I get paid? That's what we're looking for. And why do we do that? they're worried about that because there's no trust that the installer is going to get it installed in time, or the trust is eroded. And if it's not getting installed, they're worried about getting paid. But secondly, the cancellation rate is north of 50% in the industry.
The fuel to the fire to them calling in and finding out that data. You're right. That is essentially why they're calling in. I would say if we came down to the core of it, but you do also have the homeowners on the other side, fear of cancellation because of time, right? You have other obstacles like, is this actually going to happen? Homeowners getting frustrated, customer service, all those things factor into what you were talking about. Yes.
Every kind of delay, like one of the things that we started to find is that every delay by stage from what you originally thought it was going to be and what you promised the customer, every day it delays increases the cancellation rate percentage by 3%.
Wow. And you know that data from...
Yeah.
Because you had 450 companies dumping data through a system that you can create KPIs on.
Yeah, we can look at it and go, that's weird. I wonder why is the cancellation rate happening at a greater than 50% clip just because the sales guys are terrible? No. I mean, that's part of it. There can be some of that. The sales guys didn't do a good job of educating people. That was a weird emphasis in the wrong syllable there with educating. But if you start looking at that and go, why is it that we don't spend enough time educating sales reps? Do you know why? I shouldn't say it like it's rhetorical. My philosophy on why that is because it takes so long to get a rep paid, and so long for a new guy to get paid. That the only thing we're focused on, and then if you factor in there's a 50% cancellation rate or higher, what we're actually saying is, I'm so worried about getting paid, I don't have time to make sure that this guy's doing it right, because it doesn't matter, it gets canceled anyway. So I just need to get paid, and then I'm going to ask for as much as I can possibly get paid from the person I'm contracting with, so I can mitigate my losses. Mm-hmm. And somehow we're surprised that sales guys who are naturally gifted at and have honed their skills to negotiate are getting the better end of the deal. Like somehow that's a surprise.
I haven't heard it put like that.
That's what it's like. If you ask an installer to negotiate something with a homeowner or a sales rep, 9 times out of 10, the sales rep's going to get more out of the deal than the homeowner, because that's what they practice. So then we shouldn't be shocked that a sales guy is able to extract the most out of an installer, because that's what they're also good at, is negotiating. So, but if the cancellation rates are really high, right, that erodes all the things that make someone have willingness to spend money and time in creating a better workforce. So the Visa analogy is one piece. The other one that is important to talk about is Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway's method was, I'm going to invest really good capital in good businesses that are underperforming, so the capital costs less money and they can perform better.
In good businesses that are underperforming. Okay.
You could probably name, I mean, I think that the vast majority of solar companies are good companies that are performing.
That are underperforming.
Yes.
You mean in volume? In what?
In almost, I think in almost any metric. Like the fact that there's companies that are still around today in solar and have navigated the kind of crap that's happened over the last 5 years, and they're still around, they're doing things right. They're doing enough things right that they just need better capital. So if we go back and look at this and say, how did we get here to this point? To me, this is the number one issue. There's not enough working capital in the space. In 2014 through 2018, we had this major boom in consumer financing, right? LoanPal became Goodleap, Mosaic, Dividends, Sunlight Financial, Service Finance, a whole bunch of other companies were offering loans to customers. I remember selling a 12-year 299 Sunlight Financial loan with a 13 or 14% dealer fee and smashing it. I was selling like 40 of those suckers a month. 12-year 299, 13% dealer fee, killing it. The interest rate that those things are based on, this 299 with a 12% interest rate, that all comes because the Federal Fund Reserve rate was sitting basically at 0. So Wall Street's not going to be going to the Fed to go invest money in, because there's no real return on it. They need something with more risk that gives them better return. So provide this wonderful opportunity for companies that we just named to go to Wall Street and raise capital for fairly cheap. So they get all this money from Wall Street, and over time, they start inching those dealer fees up, where we're now looking at 25-year loans with a 4.49 interest rate. They're like 38% dealer fees. That doesn't even pencil. Like, you can't sell that to somebody. I'm sorry, it doesn't pencil to anybody.
That is a lot. That's huge.
It's a wild, wild number to be throwing out there. But the reason it's that way is because the actual interest rate is like 9%. 4.49 doesn't exist. That's not a real rate. It's like 9%, 10%. So they've got to buy that rate down. Just like if you're buying a house and you're paying for points to buy your house down, that's all you're doing is you're buying a smaller interest rate because you've prepaid it. Well, that's what we're doing here today with the interest rates now. We're buying it down. Then you're paying the profit for a Wall Street company who invested, and you're paying the profit for the fintech company who's the middleman. You know, most of these aren't banks; they're fintech companies, and they're repackaging and selling them off again. That model needed to exist. It had to exist because no one else could get funding.
We needed the capital.
You needed the capital. And so you look back at that time when companies like Titan, who we mentioned, and other ones who are still around, and some other ones who aren't, who've fallen victim to the same thing, they needed to grow. And you got these guys, these bankers, quote unquote, going back to them and saying, Titan, don't you guys want to scale? Get more volume? They're like, sure, but I need working capital to go invest in more warehouses and trucks and personnel and W-2 employees and equipment, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not an old enough yet company to go to a regular institutionally funded bank like Bank of America or Wells Fargo and say, can I get a loan, a working capital loan? They're going to go, cool, give me 5 years of tax returns. Well, they've been around for 3.5 years. They don't got tax returns for 5 years to qualify. So what do the banks do? They go, let me give you M1s. I'll give you M1s to help grease the tracks. There's nothing wrong with that model until everything hits the fan and changes the economics. Once you no longer have a federal fund reserve rate at 0 or 1%, or whatever it was, once your cancellations start to bump up and exceed 50%, you start now creating an asset light class in the wrong way. Not like it's wonderful. All these assets that are being sold, this asset class of financial products that are being sold, are now toxic, because every time COVID hits, you have inflation that hits, interest rates start going up, all these things start spiraling, and then all the banks start to collapse. They retract all their M1s. They start changing their milestone payments to make payments to install companies. Everyone starts going out of business.
Domino effect. Yep.
The system's broken. What are we hoping for exactly?
What's that?
I said, are we hoping that the good old days means that we go back to that time when the interest rates, the Federal Fund Reserve goes back down, and we're selling loans at those ridiculous rates, and PPAs now are taking over because there's no, like, you think there's
no other resolution to it? No, we don't go back to that, because we already know where it's going to lead when things go south, or if they do go south, right? So what is, through this insight that you have and through these metrics that you've been able to collect from Sunobi, what do you anticipate the resolution being, or what is it that you created?
I guess I would say, as we talk about this, it's not the only idea that's going to work. And I'm hoping that there's some other ones that people come up with that are also as good or better, and we learn from them. But the reality is that the only way forward, in my opinion, is we have to have a greater collective effort to work together to solve the problem. And we have to combine resources. You have to make it so that there's incentive for companies to provide better pricing and better profit margins in return. If we continue to kind of march forward in this isolationist sort of mentality of like, I'm going to do it my way and I'm going to force everyone's hand to do it my way too, we're forcing the industry to also now live by that creed, which means that we're going to continue to repeat the same things over and over again.
And operate independently of each other.
Yeah. So part of the idea of this enterprise that I'm trying to build here, called the Collective.
It is called the Collective.
The Collective, yeah. Super creative name. Obviously, no one's ever thought of it before.
I love it.
For all those,
what is the Collective? Tell us the Collective.
Yeah, so we're going to run the collective and kind of model it after a handful of things. From an organizational standpoint, to the sales organizations and the installers, are running it like a professional sports league. So we're going to mimic the NBA, we're going to mimic the NFL, we're going to mimic European soccer leagues for a number of things. So when people come into the collective, they're coming in as a club. We are going to help provide a number of things. From one, we're going to help provide the tech stack that provides all of the resource allocation they need and the way to kind of manage all the tech in one place to give us the insights that we need.
Solar distribution and payroll, or where are we talking the limits are with this?
So if you everything a sales org would need, that's the tech we're talking about. We're not introducing anything that would replace tech stacks that's necessary for operations.
Okay.
Mainly because it doesn't exist. That software doesn't exist. So we're trying to bridge the gap there, and some of Sunobi's longer term plans have those things in place. But the barrier to entry, for example, for a sales rep to become a sales dealer, quote unquote, is very minimal. But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean there's a lot of proven track record of success of a sales rep becoming a large sales org. There's so many sales orgs that are like 5 to 10 to 15 deals a month versus sales orgs that are 100 to 500 a month. There's not a lot of sales orgs that are doing, north of 100 accounts a month. So when you start looking at like, what is it that's so hard to get from 10 to 100? Some of it is organization, some of it's processes, some of it is obviously just resources. Like, they need working capital too, to build the right business, not just to give people handouts. They need to build the right business. So the collective, 1 in 10 of the collective is to provide the working capital and to provide the tech stack. So if we can do that in a way that gives these guys a chance to scale and grow in the right way, then we can start to create the platform that makes an installer happy.
That Visa did with the banks. You create that platform, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's more, like, if you're getting, so we've raised capital outside of, certainly Coda doesn't have any money, and Sunobi's not like super rich. So we've raised capital from outside places to bring in. If I'm going to an existing installer, or I'm going to another sales org to borrow money to like build a sales organization, I'm just robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's not a very effective way of doing it. So you have to bring outside capital, much like Berkshire Hathaway did to existing businesses. That's cheaper. If you can do that, then you've solved at least some of that problem. Then the platform that exists has to be one that, number one, it's exciting for sales guys to be a part of. There has to be some sort of like exclusivity portion that you want to compete against the very best and still maintain like the G League or the minor leagues or things like that, where you can still raise people up and bring them into these bigger arenas. But then you also have to have other companion type home service products that are inside the collective that allow for cross-pollination of leads. If you have fiber and roofing and HVAC and these other things that are supplying lead sources to your existing solar sales and vice versa, you're enriching your sales force to feel like they're empowered to sell the same customer multiple products and touch that customer more often than continuing to start with a 0 on the scoreboard every single day and go find a new customer in a new neighborhood. Solar by itself doesn't have reoccurring revenue.
No,
it's transactional.
You do it one time and that's it.
Unless you can sell that customer over and over and over again.
Sure.
So if you can do that with multiple services, you can provide that experience for an organization. That's part of the objective of the collective as well. Then you have to, once you have all those things in place, you have to make sure that there is, the right kind of incentives in place financially that keep people loyal and keep people motivated to stay. And then enough upside long-term that it's game changing enough. They don't feel like it's just another job. It has to feel like there's real upside.
So if you were to summarize all of this, specifically for an owner or business owner to participate in it, what would be a simple statement that you would say that the collective is to an installer that might be interested in joining it?
The collective is a platform that enables success, and it means you don't have to do everything by yourself. You maintain your autonomy, you maintain your brand. You're just plugging into a network. You're plugging into a platform.
And the benefits of that are working capital,
Working capital. Um,
allocation of
more,
lead.
there's going to be lead sources and lead sharing, better and more simplified tech, streamlined tech so you have better data decisions to make. And then the other pieces I think that come with it are the manufacturers and the installers having healthy relationships, and so at the end of the day, you have better profit margins. The way that ends up working is if everyone's got a shared goal for a similar profit together, as opposed to all fighting over the same thing, then we can actually move that to the one place. So if I've got an installer who's fighting for a better price for modules, for example, or inverters, for example, they're only going to get better pricing with more leverage from sales. So if I'm providing the sales through this collected effort, and we can go back and say to a manufacturer, I can guarantee this much sales, et cetera, I need better pricing.
Yeah.
That's not an unknown tactic. The difference is the collective wants to take that margin gain and hand it back to the installer, not keep it for the sales guys.
So if there's 50 installers on this specific platform, then that one individual platform looks like it's doing that much volume, getting that discounted amount and dispersing it between the 50 installers that are on the platform.
That's true economy of scale, right? Like if the one installer you mentioned is doing 50 accounts a month and he joins the collective, and by joining the collective, there's better pricing that comes from it than they're currently getting.
Because it's a unified volume, right?
That's right. Now they're benefiting from all the volume that comes from all of his technical competitors to make him more profitable. Then you take all the information that's shared across all those different individuals, all those different companies, and you actually share best practices beyond just sharing best prices.
Based on data.
Instead of me just saying, dude, this guy over here is killing. He's doing it in 30 days.
That CRM's better. Their CRM does this. Like you're actually looking at tangible, quantifiable data.
So you might find one company that's like super good at point of sale to design, and they can get that done in 2 days. And another company is great from design to install, and they're getting that done, or design to permit or something to install without the AHJ being involved in some record time. And the next one's really great from install to PTO. And that's maybe what their bread and butter is, or what they're really, really good at. Well, if you have the data and you can look at it, you can actually go back and go, all right, company A, let's work through, like, what makes this part so much better than everybody else? If they're all unified in the common cause of collectively we get to earn more and make more because I help each other, without sacrificing my own identity, without sacrificing my own individual contributions to the cause and my own profit margins, I get to gain in someone else's success. Then we start sharing those things in a much higher frequency, and people elevate together. We say things all the time like all the good ships rise with the tide kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who's the tide? Like, so we just assume that the tide's going to come up. And right now what's happened is the tide came up and swallowed a whole bunch of ships. They didn't float.
It's almost like a movement rather than a business. If everyone's cohesively working together, it sounds utopian. Why hasn't it done before? Why has it been done before?
Well, so I'm going to go back to Visa now and go to DHawk.
Okay.
One of his big philosophical pieces that he talks about is this notion of control. That a healthy organization versus an unhealthy organization. Healthy organizations are ones that provide vision and hope and choice. And their focus is on how do you become all the time. Unhealthy organizations focus on control from a standpoint of, I'm going to hit a button and therefore I expect this result. And if I don't get it, you're fired.
Mm.
That doesn't engender a lot of hope. It doesn't engender a lot of like optimism, nor does it engender the very thing that we're designed to do, which is to be creative. People are meant to come up with solutions. We're meant to solve problems. If you're an organization that simply says it's my way or the highway, pal, it's really hard to feel like you're going to come up with the next best thing and be able to like get it promoted. And then people say like, oh no, we're a meritocracy based company. We believe in the best ideas so long as it's my idea. If you are a data driven organization and you have all these people in one collective place,
Mm-hmm.
you can effectively eliminate some of that push, enter, therefore command happens ideology by replacing it with the same thing D Hawk did, which is this philosophy of I'm not trying to control everything. What I want to control are the data-driven best practices to share with people. And if we actually do those things, we all benefit instead of hoarding it and hiding it and thinking I'm the only one who's going to benefit. You've probably heard this there's been some studies done about finding your name in a balloon sort of thing. Have you heard about this psychological study, the social study?
Yes, but say it for the listeners. I do like that analogy.
Yeah, so it's this thing where I don't know how a couple hundred kids or something were had everyone's name placed in a balloon, and they said, okay, go find your name. And so everyone popped the balloon and tried to go find their name, and it took them like hours for everyone to find their name.
Mm-hmm.
And then they did it again. They said, okay, now I want you to help everyone else find their name. Instead of finding your name, help someone else find their name. And it got done in like, I don't know what the exact time was, but it was like minutes compared to hours.
Minutes, yeah.
Yeah, because everyone was helping each other find the thing, and you got success quicker. So it may sound utopian, and it may sound like I'm asking for people to join like a higher cause, but the reality is that I think it's the only way to do it. Why should we simply just say, I'm going to be okay settling for being selfish?
I agree with you. It's I know it's a rhetorical question, but it's like you were talking a little bit earlier. Everyone has this belief that if I'm going to build this business, I can do it better, right? And so they might be stubborn or stuck in that same mindset, or not even be aware that that might not be an opportunity to do something like this. They might not see it. They might not be able to envision what we've spent an hour talking about on here. How do you get that information out to them? When is this going to be something that they can join, and how do they get a hold of it?
We're pretty close. I mean, we're in the kind of final stages of the first phase of this. I think the first phase is, really going to take between now and the next 6 months to really get some of the things launched. We already have contracts and relationships with a number of different installers in different kind of key states. We have a handful of sales leaders that are ready to come on board as the club owners. But the proof of concept is important. Otherwise, people think it's just a fun idea. So we have to be able to show that it works and that people that are bought into the vision of what this is, can be a part of it, and that it is successful. Then once that happens, it's easier to start recruiting and saying, guys, this actually does work. And let me show you tangible results of how this installer became more profitable, how this sales org dropped its cancellation rates from 50 to 15%, how these install times increased by 40 something percent. Those are meaningful kind of targets that we have to hit for people to take us serious. Otherwise, I think it's just going to be some guy that sounds like he's high as a kite.
Well, I mean, for the sake of time, I do have another question for you. I guess the magnet to pull these people in, from what I'm hearing, is streamline efficiency in processes, which is a big one, right? The collection of data in order to make smarter decisions, and the ability to get somewhat immediate more discounts in expenses, more profit because they've unified. What would be what would be the reasons they wouldn't want to join this? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's anytime someone has a different opinion or thinks their idea is better, there's going to be that guy who doesn't want to do it.
To tie it back to the original question I asked about, and I said it would come back up, but the original question I asked about being that installer, that it has a software, and convincing all of the companies, because you have an install company, you should come and use my software. Was it a problem? You said no, because that wasn't even an objection. Do you see a community of installers getting together collectively, sharing data, and relying essentially on this utopian model? Do you see that being a problem in any way? How do
No,
you make money? Where's the conflict? There's got to be something somewhere, Mr. Optimism. Where is
no.
the
I mean,
negative?
I think everyone has a right to make money, and everyone can make money. We're going to make money too. We make money on the platform itself, right? So we're going to make a cut on every deal that gets sold because we're providing the platform to sell it. That's not a new concept either. But um, I personally think that the industry is in a lot of pain, and there's a ton of orphans. I think the sales guys, there's a lot of really, really talented sales leaders who feel disenfranchised, or they feel orphaned from either the company they've been a part of or the company that went out of business. And they're looking for a home that gives them vision and gives them a chance to grow, lets them level up without telling them you got to break through this weird bro glass ceiling that exists. You can be
Oh
your
my
own guy
goodness.
and still have the resources, right? So I think sales guys are going to be easy, I shouldn't say easy. I think sales guys will gravitate towards this because it provides the things that they want to do and they're naturally good at, and not ask them to be good at the things that they're not naturally good at. If you're providing a professionalized back office effectively for every salesperson who wants to build an organization, and they can scale with that appropriately, and everything's kind of done for them except for they have to just recruit and train and sell, which is what they're really good at anyway, you've taken away the things that bog them down, right? So as an example, I'm talking to a guy who left Coda as Coda was falling apart, and started his own thing.
Mhm.
And he came from an organization where he was doing 200 250 accounts a month, and he started his own thing and he's barely getting over 20. I said, why is that? Why is it so hard when you were with the Coda before, you're doing like 200 some odd accounts? What happened? He's like, dude, do you know how much time I have to spend doing all this CEO crap? I'm like what do you mean? He's like, dude, I mean, I've got to do payroll. I've got to come up with all of the tech stuff. When there's a tech problem, I got to solve it. When there's an issue with operations, I got to go fix it. I spend all of my time doing operational based things instead of what I used to do.
Yeah.
Now,
Salespeople
that
make.
doesn't mean he's not capable of building it, or that he can't. He's a very talented guy and he probably will build something great. But my point is that if you don't have to do it, why would you? And if you can just do what you're naturally good at and plug in, then it gives you a platform to do it, and you can still like fly your own flag. That part's cool. So once that happens and that grows, you start to create leverage because you have enough sales. Every installer is going to be like, yes, I want to participate in those sales. If the sales come through and they're better quality sales than the next guy, simply because we have better policies in place, better practices in place, better training in place that make sure that the sales at point of sale get to roof more often, then by comparison, we are a more profitable organization to partner with than the next guy. And the only metric to worry about is your cancellation rate below 25%? If it is, my 100 accounts I give you are more than the next guy's 100 accounts whose cancellations are 50%.
Sure.
That's a simple one. So I don't think it's going to be hard for installers to say, yes, I want to be a part of that. Sounds great. And if my goal is to make sure that my relationship between sales orgs and installers stays healthy, I need to make sure that I find every way possible to distribute as much wealth back to an installer as they can so they stay healthy. So that the fear that a sales org have of, I'm not going to get paid, is mitigated simply because the installer is not robbing Peter to pay Paul. They actually have.
And they're not an individual installer anymore. They're a collective set of installers that can probably participate in completing their job.
They're going to be part of that too. So I mean, that part I think is a longer, probably phase 2, where they have some of that stuff, but I'm not asking an installer to change anything today. I just want to provide them benefit. I'm not asking them to give me better anything. Just give me what's competitive and let me provide the better to you so that your organization improves. Over time, if I can provide better to them, they'll want to continue to partner with me, because that's what good partners do.
Well, I've always known you to have a lot of passion, and it sounds like you do here. And I don't mean that in a bad way. You can't create Sunobi without passion, right? You have to love it to some capacity. You have to love it more than the money. You have to love it more than simply just creating a job. You have to want to make an impact and inspire. And it sounds to me like that's right up your alley is what you're doing right here, right? If people are inspired and wanted to talk with you more about this, how would they get a hold of you?
They could shoot me an email, scott@rideforthecollective.com. But you bring up the Sunobi thing, and I think it's important to say this. One of the lessons that I think I've learned, and I'm going to bring this caveat in as well, just because I think it's valuable to say. Over the last 6, 7, 8 years, I've spent nearly $300 million trying to figure this problem out. And what I've learned is this: you cannot do this by yourself. You've got to have really smart people around you. Sunobi is full of really smart people. Coda was full of really smart people. The point of the collective, among other things, is to try and bring together as many smart people as possible so that we can achieve this thing together. I can't do it by myself, nor am I trying to do it by myself. What I'm asking people to do and inviting people to do is join me and change it. Come join the collective and be part of a bigger brain trust that actually changes the industry for the better, as opposed to just pontificating in some other room and pointing the finger at other people. If we have enough resources and we have enough reach and have the right tech platform to do it in, then we can actively change the infrastructure. We can change the process. We can build a platform that's different. We do that, we write our ticket. If we continue the same thing we've always done, we get the same result.
That was beautiful. Very well put. I want to be a cheerleader, but I also want to be a professional. That was very good. Thank you, Scott.
Appreciate it.
Well, yeah, thank you for hopping on the Morning Energy Show and sharing that with us, opening up about your past and what you're currently going through. I'm sure it's resonating with a lot of people, me included. We skimmed right there, and it's not easy. It's not easy, and I really appreciate you sharing that and being vulnerable in that way, and then also coming back with potential resolution, not just for yourself, but for the entire community of the industry. And that's, to me, how you always think, and I'm super proud to have you on here. So thank you.
I appreciate it, Jake. You've got a great product here, and I know that you didn't start off to say, I want to build a show and do a podcast. No, that's not how you started. I think what ended up happening is that the industry needed you, and you heard the call, and you delivered. And I think that if we all listen like that, I think we produce a better product. And that's part of what I think is so beautiful about humans, is they have this chance to be creative and deliver something better than, or even different than they originally thought, but still helps everybody. And if we're willing to just be a little bit more open, I think we come up with better things. And so you've been a great example of that to the whole industry and to me. And I'm appreciative to be on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. All right, everybody, we will see you soon.